Okay, so let's take a look at a demo of this. Let's start here in Engineering Lifecycle Management, where we can see the product breakdown structure for our system, which, as Iran mentioned, is called the aviary. Now, the aviary is a UAV system, and that consists of a drone, which is codenamed the Hummingbird, along with a control system called the bird feeder, and then a number of remote viewer devices called the bird watchers. Now, this aviary base, that's our platform. That is the 150% model from which we will generate our product variants based on the feature model. Now, whilst we could generate variants for the entire system, for our demo here, we're just going to focus on one part of it, which is the Hummingbird. That's the drone itself. And if I expand that out, we're going to see that that Hummingbird has requirements, it has models, and it has tests from the domain tools. Now, later, we'll explore those artifacts, and we'll see how we specify the variation points in this solution space. But first, let's switch over to pure variants and take a look at the variability space. So here is the feature model for our system, where we've defined three features and power management. Target tracking is the ability to have our drone follow a target, and remote monitoring is the ability to stream video from our drone to any of those connected bird watchers. Now, both of those features are optional, so we can choose to include or exclude them from any variants that we generate. Power management, on the other hand, is mandatory. We use that feature to control variability of properties or attributes in our requirements, designs, and tests. Now, if I actually expand that out, I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean. So here, the power management feature has a conditional attribute called capacity. Now, that's essentially the power requirement for the drone in ampere hours. And it has two possible values, 5 or 7. Now, when we generate a variant, one of those values will be automatically inserted into any requirement or model element or test that references it, based on the features included in that variant. If, for example, our new variant includes this target tracking feature, then the capacity will be set to 7. If it does not, then that capacity is going to be set to 5. And in a moment, you'll see where that value gets inserted into the requirements and the models and so on. But first, let's look at our possible variants. So over here in the tree, we can see we've defined two variant models, basic flight and surveillance. Let's open basic flight first. Now, this variant essentially includes only the capability to fly the drone manually. It does not include the target tracking feature, and it does not include the remote monitoring feature, so only the pilot those remote bird watcher devices. Now, when we actually generate this basic flight variant, because it does not include target tracking, that power capacity is going to be set to 5 wherever it's referenced. This surveillance variant, on the other hand, does include both of those optional features, and so that variant's power capacity is going to be set to 7. Okay, that's the variability space. We have our features, we have our variant models. Now let's actually return to the solution space and see how we specify variation points in the engineering artifacts. So let's go back to our product breakdown structure, where we have the requirements and the models and the tests for our Hummingbird. And let's start with requirements. So here we have our system level requirements for our Hummingbird UAV. Now, if I apply this variation view, we can see a column over here for an attribute that allows us to specify restrictions. That is, which features in the feature model that these requirements actually depend on. For example, if we generate a variant that does not include the remote monitoring feature, then this requirement and probably some others are going to be omitted from that variant. Now, this is also aware of structure. If we omit this target tracking feature, then this target tracking heading and any of its child requirements will be excluded. So we don't need to restrict each and every requirement. Now, here at the very bottom of the module, we have a requirement that references that capacity attribute of the power management feature. As we saw in the feature model, a value of 5 or 7, depending on whether or not the new variant includes the target tracking feature. Okay, let's open the sidebar here, where we can actually see that feature model actually inside Doors Next here. Now, if I select a variant, let's say that basic flight variant, we can see which features are included and which ones aren't. And we can also ask the tool to generate a preview for us. Now, based on the variant that we've selected, basic flight, and of course the features that are included or excluded from that, we'll then be able to see what this module of requirements will look like when we finally generate that new variant. If I scroll up, you're going to see that any requirement that's going to be excluded from the basic flight variant is grayed out. If I scroll back down, we look at that last requirement in the module. The preview shows us that that requirement is going to have a value of 5 for its power capacity when that basic flight variant is generated. Okay, let's clear that preview off. And let's have a look at variation now in testing. So let's start by applying a view that shows us the test cases that are linked to these requirements. Now, I'm going to follow one of those links. I'm actually going to go up to the target tracking section here. I'm going to follow one of those. That's going to take me...
I don't know how others, I don't yet see the testing tool. It takes a while, it shows up. Continue on, it will show up at some point. Now it showed up.
Yeah, some people have a bit of lag, I think, on 24. All right, so we followed a link there to the test case over in engineering test management. We have a restriction attribute here at the bottom, where we can indicate that this test case, for example, depends on that target tracking feature. Now, if we go and look at all of our test cases, then we can see all of the restrictions. We can see that 2 of the test cases there depend on target tracking. 1 of them depends on remote monitoring. And they're in 2 different test plans. Okay, that's testing. Let's now look at variation in models. And for that, I'm going to switch to the Rhapsody desktop client, where it is a little bit easier to see. Let's start over here in the model browser, where we can see the structure of the model. Now, depending on the variant that we generate, some of these artifacts will be required and some of them won't. For example, this target tracking package here has a restriction, and that restriction depends on that target tracking feature. Now, here in the Rhapsody model, that feature has been modeled as a use case, and it's also been modeled as an entire package of stuff that actually models the functional use case. Now, if I go and locate that use case, let's say we want to navigate to that on a diagram, then there we can see that target tracking is just one of the use cases in our overall Hummingbird model. Now, that's just one variation point, one restriction. It's going to remove an entire chunk of our model. But if I switch to this tab, here we have a table of all of the variation points in the model. At the bottom here, you can see the one that we just looked at, that target tracking package, depending on the target tracking feature. Now, most of the other variation points, and that first column shows the feature that they depend on. But also that very first row is different. Here we have a calculation. We'll actually take a look at that in a moment. But first, let's look at 2 more restrictions. First, a restriction on behavior. This manage viewer session artifact depends on the remote monitoring feature, which, if you recall, is the capability of our UAV to stream video to remote viewer devices, which we call bird watchers. Now, if I navigate again to that artifact in the browser, you'll see that's an action. It's actually part of a higher level activity called secure comms. And if I navigate to that again on a diagram, then we can see that's actually a core behavior, part of this secure comm activity, and that core behavior has an entirely different activity behind it. We can navigate to that if we want to see it. Now, if our new variant that we generate excludes the remote monitoring feature, then we don't need any of that behavior, but we still need to perform all of the other actions on this diagram, such as processing commands, streaming video to the pilot, or reporting status. Let's go back to our table and we'll look at one more restriction, this time on architecture. So this artifact here, PRT Birdwatcher, that also depends on the remote monitoring feature. If I navigate to that in the browser, there we can see that's more of a structural artifact. It is in fact a SysML part. And again, if I navigate to that on a diagram, then we can see that a little bit more graphically. We can see that that actually is an architectural representation of those Birdwatcher devices that communicate with our Hummingbird system. And they do that through ports and interfaces. Then we don't need any of those architectural elements. Okay, let's go back to our table and let's have a look at variability in attributes. Now, the very first row here has this model element called capacity. That model element is going to take its value from the capacity attribute of the power management feature, exactly the same way that the requirement we saw earlier did. This is actually really powerful. We can specify that conditional data once in the feature model, and then we can refer to it in any requirement, model element, or test artifact. If I navigate to that capacity element in the browser, then we can see that's a value property. It's a SysML name for an attribute. That's an attribute of the power management subsystem here in the architectural design. That's going to get a value of 5 or 7, depending on which variant we generate. Okay, let's run a preview. First, I'm going to switch to one of our open diagrams, just so you can see the magic happen live. And just like we did in requirements management, we can open up a picker that lets us select a variant. In this case, we will select the basic flight variant, just as we did before. And just as we did before, we can request a preview. In this case, it's going to show us what the model is going to look like if we generate that basic flight variant. So here on the architectural diagram, we can see that because the basic variant has no remote monitoring feature, then the resulting model has no Birdwatcher, but also the ports and the connectors and the interfaces that facilitated the communication between that and the Hummingbird system will also be removed. Activity diagram. The basic flight model has no need to manage a viewer session, so that part of the behavior is removed, it's grayed out. But the rest of the activity is going to remain. On the use case diagram, the transformation into that new variant is going to remove the target tracking use case, but it's also going to remove the target actor, the Birdwatcher actor, and all of the relations that connected them to the use cases. Okay, having seen a couple of previews, really, of what's going to happen when we generate that basic flight variant, let's actually do it. Let's switch back to pure variants, and we'll select the variant that we want to generate, which is the basic flight variant, and then we're going to invoke a transform. Now notice here we could transform just one domain if we wanted. Well, I'm going to select GC, which actually is going to transform all of them. It's also going to transform the global configuration, which actually organizes those other domains. And that's going to take about 20 seconds or so because it's going through a process. Pure variants is going to start by creating a baseline. It's going to baseline the global configuration, and it's going to baseline all of the domain tools as well. Then, having created the baselines, it's going to create streams from those baselines for each of the domains. And of course, those new streams that get created are are going to have variations in them based upon the feature model that we've actually chosen here. All right, that's actually finished transforming, so let's go and see the result. Back in our product breakdown structure, since we transformed the hummingbird, I'm going to navigate up to the root of that hummingbird. That's going to make it easy for me to get to its own in component stream. But you can also see the newly generated basic flight variant stream. Now, the default name is the variant followed by a timestamp. That naming is, of course, configurable. But if we open that new basic flight variant stream, over here on the right, you can see that stream was generated from a baseline that was taken first, and then these new streams were generated. Well, let's go take a look. We'll start with requirements. Now, notice at the top, we are working on the basic flight variant. If I open that module of requirements and we apply that variation view again, you'll see that column is completely empty. All of the requirements that had restrictions on them have been removed because the basic flight variant had none of the features on which they depended. Notice also that the last requirement in that module has a value of 5. Of course, we can also run a comparison here in Doors Next. We can go and compare our new variant to the original base platform set of requirements. And then we'll get a wizard. We'll skip to the end. And we can see these requirements were removed from our new variant. They only exist in the base platform. If we look at the artifacts that exist in both but are somehow different, that includes the module. And then we can see that a little bit more graphically. These requirements were removed. This was removed. If we jump to the bottom, this requirement exists in both the platform and the new variant, but it is different. This was the original placeholder for the capacity. This here is the actual capacity. Okay, I think we're almost out of time. I was going to show you test case comparison, but I do want to do one more thing. Hopefully you can stick around for this. Let's going to take, first of all, a look at the version of the slide that Iran showed earlier. Now, this is where we are right now. We've generated our basic flight variant from the platform, that new variant, whilst at the same time, another team is also continuing to work on the platform. At some point, we want to consolidate the platform changes with the basic flight variant changes. And we can do that very easily by first generating another variant from the platform. Right, we'll call that the refresh. And then we deliver any changes our basic flight variant team has made to that refresh, thereby consolidating everything into a new stream. So let's go and see that in action. First, our variant team are actually working on the requirements for our basic flight variant, which is this stream here. So let's open that up. We'll go back into our modular requirements here. And we'll start by creating ourselves a change set that we can actually deliver later on. All right, we'll give that a name, call it something like increase range. Now, I'm working here as Pete, one of our variant team members, so any changes we make right now are only going to be made in his personal area until we deliver them back to the team. So let's go make a change. Let's modify this first requirement, and we'll change the range of the drone from 40 miles to 80 miles. Now, Pete is going to deliver that change set back to the rest of the team, to his own stream. So I'm just going to do an express delivery. That's going to happen very quickly. Now we can switch back from Pete's own personal area back to that basic flight variant that the rest of the team can see. And we can see now we've got 80 miles as a range of the drone. So now imagine the platform team has also been making changes. To do that, we're going to generate that refresh stream. We're going to go back to pure variants. We're going to generate ourselves another transform. I'll actually just select requirements management. I'll just select the Doors Next option. But of course, as before, that's going to do the same job. It's going to create a baseline, and it's going to create a new stream. Also, as before, it's going to be called basic flight along with a timestamp So that should make it easy for us to distinguish between these two new basic flight streams. Of course, we can always rename them after the fact to make it easier. That's our new stream generated. Let's go back to requirements management, where we are still working on the original basic flight variant, where we increased the range of the drone to 80 miles. Let's now switch contexts. I'm going to search for all of them. And you can see now we have two basic flight streams. This is the most recently generated stream. That's our refresh. So we'll select that one. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the range of the drone is back to being 40 miles, which is what it was in the platform. And now we can start consolidating the changes. We can pull or we can push. And since we're working in the refresh, we'll choose to pull them. We're going to accept changes. Again, I'll do a quick search. I'm going to choose the original basic flight variant stream that we created to accept changes from. Now, notice we have two change sets. If I select a custom workflow and choose the change sets I want to accept, we can see that there is the increase range change set that the variant team just created, but there's also a roll-up of any changes made to the platform that were happening in parallel with our basic flight team's work. Now, or both, in this case, I'll just accept the increase range change set because we haven't really done anything in the platform anyway. Now, our new refresh stream is once again in sync, and we've consolidated the changes, and we now have a range of 80 miles an hour. 80 miles rather. I think that's it for the demo. I've gone a little